Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to the Monday Morning Data Chat. Got our usual guest on, Ben Rogojan, Seattle data guy. What's going on?
Good morning, everyone. How are y'all doing?
Doing well. It's the Happy New Year edition too.
Yes, it is the first one of the
Happy
year.
New Year. Yeah. It's awesome, man. So how was did you have a good New Year?
Yeah, no, I had a great New Year. I mean, obviously, I think we talked about it a little bit earlier. Had a little bit of an interesting start, being near Broomfield, but overall, good New Year. No complaints. Kept it pretty simple,
I guess
low
for people
key.
who don't know where Broomfield is or what happened there, do you want to quickly just tell everybody?
Sure. Yeah,
The
no, I mean,
scene?
in Broomfield on basically, I think Thursday on the 30th, there's just there's like two wildfires in Boulder and Broomfield-ish area, and had to evacuate really quickly there, just to make sure I wasn't, awakened in the middle of the night by a fire. So yeah, it was really sad. A lot of people's homes were lost just right after Christmas. So it's just one of those things that, it really really makes me think. When all I had was a backpack and like a few things, I was like, man, if I come back to nothing, that's going to really be a terrible way to start the year. So I luckily did not, but some people really will start this year off without a house, and that's hard, I think.
Yeah, it sucks, man. So yeah, condolences to anybody who lost their house or other stuff during that was just sad to watch. So yeah, 100-mile-an-hour winds and just a giant fire. So
Weird.
anyway, cool. Well, welcome to 2022. I guess we want to talk about data engineering in 2022. I'm sure there's a lot to cover here. What's been on your mind going into the year with respect to data engineering, Ben?
Yeah, I think like there's a few things, right? Like for me, right, being someone that just creates a lot of content, I think there's a lot of content I want to create around trying to help people understand, one, data engineering from a just beginner standpoint, and then two, helping people kind of understand the landscape of like the tooling and just kind of the massive constant explosion that's going on there. And I think we kind of talked about this a little bit, where it's like, yeah, some of the things I'm thinking about is like funding and seeing who's getting funded, seeing all the interesting drama in between tools as they're trying to position more. So I think that's there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in this space. I'm curious to see like what's going to happen in terms of like, I imagine consolidation, because there's only so much business for these tools to do and only so much money, so much talent. So in a weird way, they have to consolidate, because at a certain point, it's like we can't have 30 of data observability tools or something like that, because it's like, well, there's only so much business for this, and we're gonna have to eventually figure out who the winner is. So yeah, I think it's a lot in that space where it's like, okay, how is this all going to kind of like funnel in the next year or two?
Yeah, seems like there's a mind share issue here too. Like not just money, but like we as a community can't focus on 30 different tools. Like people can't be interested in 30 different tools. A few winners have to emerge, even just in the open source space.
Well, you mean 30 of the same tools too, right?
Well,
because I have trouble keeping track of 30 different tools on my own, let alone 30 of the same ones. It's difficult. Yeah, I think the common question we get, is what tools should I use for this problem, right? And so I think we kind of have our short list. I'm sure you do too. But then it's the other questions like, well, but what's the balance between, I guess, sticking with sort of the good old standby versus making sure you're current and paying attention to the latest developments, and even in that category where that tool exists. So.
Yeah, and I think that kind of ties back to what Matt brought up earlier. It's like we just can't keep up with it at a certain point. At a certain point, like we just hit a limit, right? Like how much we want to do, how much we want to learn. Like it's like that's not impactful for us to when it comes to actually executing, right? Like it's impactful to do, not to constantly have to spend time figuring out, okay, what's this tool? Is it useful? Is it just new and needs time to kind of build a lot of features? So yeah, it's it'll be nicer on us too if we could consolidate just a little bit for the next few years.
I mean, walk me through this. How do you go about researching and learning about new tools?
Yeah, I mean, like I think it's a combination of things. I think one, because I put out so much content, I think that naturally inclines me to looking up a ton of tools, right? Like, I think that's part of it. I think sometimes people reach out to me a lot, right? Because I do again write so much content. Like people always want to share their tool and their idea with me as well. And then just doing it through work. I think a lot of projects I have do often ask like, what is the best fit for us data observability wise. And so you always have a little bit of time to, have your, like you said, your short list, but maybe look up 1 or 2 new things here and there to figure out what's the best fit. So I try to layer it into everything else I'm doing. Basically, it's like, well, I'm already going to be doing videos on technology, so I might as well try to keep up with what's going on. I also kind of categorize things in, okay, is this just a new startup with maybe it's only been around for a year, probably won't have a lot of features just yet. So is it not really worth for me to put a ton of time into it until it like has some legs? Probably, right? Like I think that's the case with a lot of tools. Like some of them just too new. I think the harder thing to keep up with is open source because they don't always market as well. So then it's like, okay, what open source projects exist? And there's just so many, and it's so easy to start one. So I think that's the harder gap there.
That's awesome. Scott, what's up, Scott Taylor? Happy New Year to you. Just came in late. Ben, are you changing your moniker to Seattle Tool Guy?
No. I think it'll always be Seattle Data Guy. That's where I started. I mean, like that, by that same question, if you're paying attention slightly earlier, the fact that I am no longer in Seattle might complicate things even further, obviously. But Denver Data Guy or Broomfield Data Guy is just, it's not my home. Seattle's my home, so yeah, probably not.
Broomfield Tool Guy might
too long.
Too long.
It's just I don't know. And plus, like Broomfield, people have to know where Broomfield is. I feel like Seattle's a little. I think Denver Data Guy would make a little more sense.
Denver Data has a nice alliteration to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Or Denver Data Dude or something.
Yeah, actually, we were just
Dual brand. Yeah,
I was just talking to a friend about that. I was like, oh man, it's almost a little too bro-y. It's like
Denver Data Diva, if you want to,
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Triple D something. Yeah.
Toiling in Obscurity has a question from YouTube. Why do you guys think there are 30 different tools for the same thing? I don't think it's really a thought as much as there just are 30 different tools for the same thing. But maybe we can get into some reasons why, right? So I think there's a lot of hot spaces in data right now. We'll take observability as an example, right? I think this is a perfect example where there's a, I think there's probably over 30 data observability tools out there, probably more. And there's also, coupling this with just a lot of VC funding right now. Data is hot. And so if you have, kind of a pulse on observability, for example, have some experience with it. Maybe you don't even have experience with it, but just like the field, and have an idea, it might be slightly different from other tools. It's really easy to find money if you can get the money, right? And so I just think that there's a huge economic incentive for people to, develop companies around tools, whether it's observability or any other of the bajillion niches out there right now. So what are you guys' thoughts?
One wonders if there aren't like just a lot of internal tools that various companies have created and data engineering teams that were started out fairly simple, and someone was at a job, say at Facebook or something, like, hey, I could take this open source, I could start a company, VCs are banging down my door, let's go for it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it, right? Like that's a lot of these projects. Or like when I did work at Facebook, I would always look outside and just be like, oh yeah, look at all these companies that basically have the exact same tools or building the exact same tools that we have internally, but they're just making money off of it or trying to make money off of it. They often look the same or felt the same or trying to solve a similar problem. It's just like you said, there's a lot of money going around in the data space. It seems like a good bet to make, and there's a lot of people who think they know how to do it the right way. And obviously, everyone wants to kind of be their own startup CEO these days. So everyone kind of starts up their own company, and it's just there's a lot of different ways to do the same problem. And I think the other thing that I've seen is like a lot of times, like sometimes these companies don't even necessarily start as like a data observability tool or a reverse ETL tool. They start as something else. And then whether it's trends, whether it's how people are using their tool, they just find that, now we're a reverse ETL solution, or we can kind of pivot a little bit and we fit a little more into this moniker. And I think that's kind of part of it as well. It's easier to market, easier to kind of sell if you have something to kind of tie it to.
Yeah, it seems to be the case. Yeah, I think that, the classic, so I think the first, kind of generation of big data tools, data engineering tools were exactly what you described as open source projects that were released from large companies at the time, right? Yahoo, Google, Amazon and so forth. And so they just kind of took out a life of their own. Facebook, I think, was, the some pretty pivotal things started there. Hive and Presto, to name just a couple, right? GraphQL. Yeah. So, these have spawned, giant companies and, new ways of doing stuff. And so it almost seems like in some cases as an engineer at these companies, your meal ticket, so to speak, is to work at these companies, get that brand on your resume, work on a project, spin it off, get some money, and start a company. So I personally know a lot of people that have done this, and it seems to work.
So. Are you talking about like Martin? What's the guy? Is it not Maxime? The guy who did like Airflow and There's a few of them, right? And, and I think some of them have multiple projects.
Yeah.
It does seem to be a solid way. And I think the thing is, like, a lot of these individuals they were the builders of these tools to begin with, right? Like, they're the ones who they built it internally first, generally, and then they're like, okay, well, I built this anyways, might as well build it again, or build it without having someone else tell me what right is, or maybe just because I want to fix all the mistakes I did with the first iteration. And so
yeah, it happens a lot. And the other thing is, like, the big one of the big players in the data space right now is DBT, and they started out as a consulting company, right? And then this internal tool gets a lot of traction in the open source community. It's awesome, and now they're a juggernaut in the data space. So and I know a couple other consulting companies that have done this. Superconductive did this with Great Expectations, for example, right? And they're killing it right now. So it's interesting. Let me see here.
The comment.
Scott says he's creating an observability tool for observability tools. So
nice. Okay.
Awesome. Oh my God, VC friends out there, go hit up Scott Taylor.
Scott, can we get in on this? Like,
throw him some money.
Work together on this.
That makes me think is like sometimes I feel like Airflow needs like an orchestration tool, because there's like so many other tools that kind of like, I'm like, oh, do we need like a tool that's on top of all of these tools that orchestrates all of our data so we can see everything, and just like, oh God. But it's pretty. It's been fun to kind of work in data, but it's definitely been hard to keep up with it all. But like
Scott points out too. I mean, I think what he's referring to as open source has been happening ever since there were computers. By the way, I mean, he's absolutely right. I mean,
true. Yeah.
I remember what was it back in the day? It was called shareware. So back in like the 90s or the 80s. So that's how I got a lot of my software back in the day. So I mean, it's been it's an old model, but what's old is new again, and what works, right? So that's kind of the model here. Guy Thompson has a question here. How much weight does having affiliate partnerships play in suggesting tools to a client? I think this is a good question.
Yeah. I mean, like, I didn't even know about affiliate partnerships till like last year. I was like, wait, people like, you get a some sort of portion of a contract. I was like, that's weird. And like, he's probably like insinuating like that could be the wrong incentives. Personally, like, I just try to find the right tool. Like, there are tools I like, and there are plenty of tools that I think I do have partnerships with, and some of them I like to refer. Some of them I'm like, it's not my favorite, so I don't like using it. I think a lot of the tools that I like using are very similar to my Mac, where it's like, I don't know why I necessarily like using it, but I do, and so I use it. And I do try to find like a good fit. Like, if a person or if a company wants to do something that's more code based, then I'll always push them towards Airflow. And if they're open to it, a more managed version of Airflow. If they're open to doing some sort of low code solution and all their data sources will benefit from that, then I might pick something that's, I'm connected with, because that tool exists and it's easy to use and it can reduce their costs. So it's just finding that balance, I think.
I think so. I think for us, we have a lot of partnerships at Ternary. One of them's, what's up, GCP?
Shilling Joe.
Yell a little louder. They can't hear you.
Yeah.
But, and I mean, we partner with, I would say, countless data companies, data technology companies, I would say. But the thing is, our approach really is, we always figure out what's the right tool for the client, right? So, I mean, it always comes down to that use case first, and then we evaluate it from, okay, so if we have a partner that can help out with that, terrific. If not, then we suggest something that is going to ultimately satisfy the need, because that's our job. That's what the companies, the customer's paying us for. They're not paying us to sort of like shill, as you say, right? So
Yeah.
it's not tasteful. So
and I've often found that like you're arguably getting paid, and the client relationship is worth far more than the partnership relationship, right? Like, I mean, like in some ways, the partnership relationship brings you new clients, but like that client is so valuable, right? Like it's like I don't want to give you something just because I'm going to get paid a little bit from a tool. I'd much rather just give you exactly what you need. Make sure you want me to keep working with you, because that's way more valuable than having to re-find a new client because they're upset.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the one thing at Ternary we always focus on is just reputation, so that means having great outcomes for clients. So if we suggest tools that are just suboptimal, I don't think it helps us at all. What are your thoughts, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's kind of a subtle question, right? Because even if you don't intend to let these relationships affect you, they sort of do. So Ben, you brought up the familiarity issue, right? Like your Mac, you're just used to using it. It does what you need it to. You're not really inclined to try anything else, even if Windows keeps getting better and better. It's like, well, why would I've got to be very motivated to try a different tool. And I find that happens a lot in kind of the affiliate partnership space too, where if you've done work with these companies, you're familiar with their tools, and so you're probably going to try them again. Like it's just a natural go-to. Another thing I try to keep in mind, and sometimes in the open source space, just all the excitement about tools, we lose sight of this, is mindshare, right? It's like, yeah, it's awesome to jump on a new bandwagon, but in terms of what I'm going to recommend to my clients, I want something where they can find answers easily.
Yeah.
Even if it's not like the very best possible architecture, that's going to be my default unless they're like they really want to dive into new stuff and do their own code hacking. I don't want to recommend something where they're going to have to do open source code hacking at all, because no, that's not their job. Their job is to get things done. I want them to be able to go to a Slack community, ask a question, and even if that answer is slightly hacky, have an answer right away and have a lot of maturity around whatever tool they're using. And I think especially with like 30 different data observability tools, that's something that maybe we sometimes overlook, is just the maturity question.
Yeah. I think that's always kind of an important thing. Like, and also for me too, it's like if I'm consulting and if I'm going to recommend a tool and I can't find any information on that tool, it's going to really make my job hard. It's going to make me hard to deliver. So I mean, like anyone who's building a tool out there, you you do need to start with like a baseline, right? Like of a certain amount of information that we can find, like that people are going to look up, because otherwise it's just going to be really hard for anyone to want to work with that tool, because it's like, okay, now I have to spend hours just to figure out this one error because there's no way for me to Google this answer. And it's like, okay.
Well, and that's inexcusable these days too. I mean, for God's sake, I mean, there 30 bajillion tools per category these days. It's like there's stiff competition. So if you haven't provided good documentation, really good onboarding experience, you're going to be left in the dust. And frankly, I can't recommend that type of a product either. Like why do that? Our time is very limited and it's very valuable, everyone on this call, and it's there's also that. So, if a tool is going to make onboarding in the least, just friction heavy and a pain in the butt, then just move on to something else. There's no shortage of options at this point.
Yeah. That's probably why I've like, and although developer advocates don't necessarily just do this, or maybe don't spend much time doing this at all, I've noticed like a huge push for most companies to have like developer advocates, and like more and more of them, and treating them more like engineers, because like having someone that can both write articles and write content around your product, as well as having them being able to have technical expertise, like that balance is so rare. To know what people are going to look for, to know what people are going to want to find. It's a really hard kind of niche to find. I noticed that I think like Snowflake it feels like 20 plus developer advocates on their team. Like, and I'm just that to me is pretty.
We do a lot of
huge.
work with Snowflake. We're a partner of theirs too, and we love working with them because they, just everything about the experience is good, right? Yeah. So that's also, I think. I think from a partnership angle too, one of the things that we look at is this kind of energy in and energy out. So if a partner is going to bat for us a lot, and reciprocating, then, that tends to also kind of influence how we would go about it. That was notwithstanding that obviously it has to be the right tool for the right job. But obviously if a partner is going to bat for us a lot, then we'll probably go to bat for them, because it's just, that's good form as well, right? So, and it also shows, I think, that we think that the product would work well in a lot of the situations for the client. So, but I can tell you, like, a bad partnership is one where they just make you just do a lot of work and like it's like send
Paid money.
referrals to it.
Right,
Yeah, pay money, send us
and then like,
referrals,
okay.
but then you're just
Yeah.
like, what are we getting out of this arrangement here? So but there's a lot of companies out there that think that their partnerships are worth that kind of a hassle, and maybe for some types of clients it is, but for us, we try kind of shy away from those. So good questions.
Yeah.
I guess one other thing I'd comment about the tool space and partnerships and everything else, Joe, you're pretty fond of comparing the proliferation of tools in the tech space and the data space with the music industry where you were back in the day, and so as like a producer, you're always looking for that new sound, like something that's fundamentally new that you can then go out and sell these days on Spotify. Back in the day, selling, CDs out of someone's trunk or something like this. And I guess the question for us is, what fundamentally new things are we looking at in all these tools? Like somewhere out there's got to be like the diamond in the rough where it's not just observability, but it's something that's really going to do something that someone hasn't done before. And for that reason, it will start to get traction.
Well, I was having a chat with Ben Stansel about this the other day. Right. And it's interesting because we're reflecting back on like, sort of the last 10 years, 20 years of data. And it's like, it's interesting because a lot of the same problems everyone's talking about then are the same problems you're talking about now. So why is it that we have all these tools, all this new technology, and yet we still can't address, some of the core problems around data? Trust being one of them. Big one, actually. Scott Taylor, I'm sure, can talk more about that. But he's absolutely right. It's a lot of it starts at the source, and so I'm curious. For me, I'm looking at tools that help not just solve a particular pain point. Like observability is great, but it's kind of riffing on with Ben. It's kind of as he pointed out, okay, so your pipelines are up, right? Great, cool. If the report's wrong, if you're in a meeting and the report's wrong, what did it matter that your pipelines had, 99.99% uptime?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of gets back to a larger point. But what do you guys look at?
I don't know. I think, and Ben, you can comment on this too. I mean, one of the comments we got when you announced this chat today, Joe, was about streaming basically and just general interest in streaming. And I think one of the things we've been talking about a lot is that the answer you generally get when you ask about streaming data modeling is that you don't model data in streaming. And so I wonder if there are going to be changes around that aspect of streaming or other aspects of streaming. I feel like Druid and Imply adding joins to streaming might have a big impact in the future on other tools, and then we'll start thinking more about data modeling in the space. I don't know.
Yeah, I think this question was from Melissa Dominguez. What's up, Melissa? She was asking, will we be discussing the challenges of working with streaming data? We can dive into that real quick. So,
I mean,
I
think
what are some of the challenges?
I think maintainability is always hard. Like when it comes to like batch ETL is just always going to be easier. It's going to be more easier to check from a QA standpoint, easier to just manage. I like at a company that's got 1,000 pipelines. Again, just depends company to company. But if you got 1,000 pipelines, if they're all streaming, something goes wrong in 10% of them or even 1% of them, that's a lot of work that you're gonna have to put into to fix them. And versus if you've got 1% of your batch ETLs go wrong, you can probably, it's a little, I think it's a little smoother as long as they're like a daily load. Like, okay, this is something we can fix by the end of the day. Like we don't have to feel like, oh man, we got to fix this to like get some report. I think usually for me, streaming is more about like the use case, right? Like to me, it's either that you need the data live for something, or you just have so much data that it's just easier to take, load that data in live. Unless you're mostly referring to, I guess the OLAP streaming, like because you brought up like Druid, and ClickHouse is another one that I know has also gotten a ton of money. So I don't know which side you're referring to this on.
I suppose a bit of each, frankly. Yeah, there are a lot. And I find that even around fairly basic streaming competencies, there's probably a lot of social capital that still needs to develop. I think engineers who've worked in the streaming space or worked with customers using streaming understand, using window-based tools where they emit metrics over time, things like Flink and Apache Beam, and even Spark, for example, has this kind of capability. But I don't think that has necessarily made its way out for analytics product managers, for example, to fully understand how that works. So even on very basic things, there's some progress to be made on just understanding how you can use streaming and what its power is and how it can deliver value to your business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd be very curious to see how this kind of shapes up over the next, call it 2 years, whatever. I just feel like streaming is, it's one of those things. It's been around forever,
right?
And in fact, we tend to subscribe to the Flink's philosophy, really, where batch is actually a subset of streaming, right?
Sure.
So if you consider data to be an unbounded entity, which it is, batch is just basically bounding artificially data by whatever boundaries you choose to bound it by. So, but it's definitely less mature. I mean, from a data perspective too, from an analytics, say OLAP, you just have practices that have been around for a really long time too, right? So modeling like Kimball, Inman, Data Vault, these have been around and battle tested. But when it comes to modeling, for OLAP use cases for streaming, that's just it's wide open at this point. Some people think you could use Data Vault for streaming, and I think technically it's possible. I would just push back and say, okay, so the number of successful Data Vault projects is how many? And then, and streaming is supposed to be inherently a simpler-ish operation, right? I mean, Krebs came out. G. Krebs had the Kappa architecture article. It came out 2016 or something like that, 2015. But that just basically was the notion that just keep all your data, in Kafka, for example, and just that's your system. So I don't know. I'm fascinated by this whole question though, and so if Melissa's on, if you can drop in a question in chat, kind of asking what are some of the challenges she's looking at. I would love to kind of riff on that too. So. But yeah, what are your thoughts, Ben, on the kind of the emergence of these new OLAP? I wouldn't say new, but they're newer OLAP databases like ClickHouse, Firebolt, and so forth. Do you have any thoughts on those?
I think I'm still curious to see them more in play. I haven't got to work with them directly. I think that's a big thing. I know that ClickHouse is one that's gotten a lot of support. Still kind of curious to see it work. Like you said, I think for me the curious thing will be seeing some more of like that battle testing, which I haven't seen. I think you guys are a little more connected with like Firebolt, so you might be able to provide a little more context on that in terms of like what you've seen done well in those kind of tools, and maybe what you'd like to see in the next year or two.
Yeah, I think the use cases really tend to center around the things I'm finding. Adoption and interest for these tools it's not so much like the classical Kimball modeling type exercises, right? Because in some of these databases you can't do deletes or updates, so they're insert only. So, but it's more of kind of this. I wouldn't say it's a newer notion, but it kind of is of data applications in embedded analytics where you just need users expect fast queries, and by users I'm talking about end users of like maybe say a mobile app, for example, or something like that, where you're so if you think about a product like like a food delivery app or something like that, right? That's basically a gigantic analytics app, or Uber is basically a giant data application at the end of the day. It just happens to get you a ride somewhere, right? So but it seems like these databases are really geared towards that, where you need fast analytics, large amounts of data. So,
yeah, and to me, looking at these tools, and I was actually writing some about Firebolt indexing techniques yesterday in our book. They're doing some very cool things with sparse indexes and such. You can look up various YouTube videos on that. But it still feels like the different tools are tuned for different use cases. So for example, BigQuery is just awesome at scanning huge amounts of data. That's basically how it works. It can just scan, pull in so much data and scan it, which means that if you need to do a statistical calculation over a billion rows, BigQuery is awesome. Whereas Firebolt is more tuned for predicate filtering. So if you're going to be filtering on a lot of predicates and you want to do that very, very quickly, their indexing system is awesome for that. And so to me, that kind of raised the question, like, when are we going to get better, maybe table auto optimization, where you can apply all of these techniques and I no longer have to go in and manually cluster things. Instead, the database monitors what queries run against that table and it says, okay, it looks like you scan huge amounts of data. So all the time you want to scan the full table because you need a lot of statistics Whereas this other use case is mostly predicate filtering on these particular fields, and that behind the scenes can kind of optimize the structure of the data to those different use cases. One even wonders if we'll get to a point where you can maybe do a better job of combining columnar and row-based data. That's one thing they're pushing with Apache Hudi, where you can combine those different techniques. And again, auto-optimize to say, okay, this is more of a row-based use case, this is more of a columnar use case, and the engineers don't even have to think about those details. Obviously, that puts people like us out of a job to some extent, but I wonder if we're going to start going in that direction.
I mean, I think there's still plenty of work to do.
There always
besides
is,
that,
right?
I think, I don't know. I think that's the biggest thing, right? Like tools are the reason, because I think you brought this up earlier, Joe. Like, why is it that we're getting all these tools, but we have the same problems that we had for the last 20 years, right? Like the term source of truth and like using it as a marketing term continues to be used now as much as it was used 10 years ago. And we're no closer to, finding this source of truth, so to speak, in many companies. And I think the thing is like data is just multiplying, right? Like it just keeps growing. Like people have more sources, people have more data, people have, just more everything. And so management just becomes more and more difficult. And tools are the only thing that tools do is try to make it a little easier for us, right? Like I like to tell people, I think about it almost like a factory floor or something, or like Ford's assembly line, right? Like they're just the tools on the assembly line that are going to make things hopefully easier, because at a certain point, our hands, our manual processes are not going to be able to manage it anymore. Because it just keeps getting bigger, and people want more from it. And we
and you can have better cars, but it's not going to make you a better driver, right?
Sure.
So I think that's kind of the central thing. It's like, well, I mean, to kind of stretch the analogy a bit. I mean, number of car accidents seems to go down a bit, but it's still unreasonably high, I would say, in a lot of places. And so it's so having better cars makes it safer if you get into an accident, but it still doesn't resolve the fact that people still get into accidents. And I think to kind of stretch the analogy even further, the data is similar-ish. Accidents just being kind of mishaps with data or lack of trust or something like that. So I don't know. Maybe I'm also full of it. Who knows? But that analogy, you just need self-driving cars and everything's solved, right? So, meaning what Matt was proposing was basically some sort of an AI-driven scheme where you would, essentially just. It's an interesting point you bring up, Matt, though, because it's kind of doing the mental exercise where you're describing this, and it's like, okay, so you would basically, are you suggesting kind of like reconfiguring how tables are stored as well?
I mean, possibly, right? It was just something I was thinking about yesterday, because I always see these crazy benchmarks, and it's like Imply is 1,000,000 times as fast as BigQuery, and Firebolt is 1,000,000 times as fast as Snowflake. And if you look at it, it's like, okay, Firebolt is an awesome tool. They have this like very specific way of indexing that's just amazing for certain types of queries, maybe not as good for other types of queries. And I think that's true of all of these tools. And so one wonders if we won't get to the point where you'll adopt multiple ways of storing data and indexing and just auto-optimizing over time according to what people are doing with that particular table. Again, do you need to like query all history and do some super complex data science clustering calculation? That's one use case. Very narrow predicate filtering is completely different. That's something that things like Teradata used to do really, really well because they're indexed, right? And that's part of what Firebolt is doing, is like adding this indexing capability to columnar databases so you can really narrow down on particular predicates. So yeah, I just wonder if we'll see tools in the future that kind of evolve to multiple data storage paradigms. And especially once you're separating compute from storage, this becomes more feasible, right? It's not like old school on-prem database where it stores data in exactly one way for the most part.
Right. Yeah, that's a very fascinating concept, because you could basically, if the data is more appropriate to be queried, if it's in a document store, it would just be like, well, we'll save it as this format. Done. Yeah. Huh. Sorry, Ben. This is the kind of stuff that Matt and I
we're going
on all day. Like literally, if Matt and I are just walking down the street, we're just like, yeah, what about this idea? This sounds crazy enough.
No, it sounds like, I would say, no, it sounds like you guys are about to build a new database here. You guys starting the next company here?
If there are any VCs out there, just feel free to use Cash App, send Matt some money.
That's right.
I mean, but no, I think some sort of layer, like further kind of abstracting things, I think makes sense, and like just finding the right engine to use, like. And that maybe it's that simple. Maybe you're smart enough to build a super smart engine that can do it all, or maybe you just figure out like I don't know, somehow based off the query, what engine to run something off of based off of, what's going to be most optimal. I don't know what the answer is there, but
I don't
I'm
know
sure there's a few
either.
different ways you can do that.
Maybe Todd would know. Cache invalidation problems. Yeah, I could see that hellscape happening. We got a comment from Andreas. Hey guys, great to see you all. Happy 2022. Good to see you too, Andreas. So shout out to Andreas is one of the OGs of the data engineering content world. So I'm always stoked to hear from him. So yeah, hope you had a good New Year, man. He's actually going to be on the show in a couple weeks. So awesome. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, what else? Anything else on your mind for 2022 for data? I know there's no shortage of things.
Do we dare mention the like rabid competition between Snowflake and Databricks? I think it's just a really fun thing to watch. I'm not gonna like start punching people in that fight, but yeah.
Oh no, I think it's not a punching. I think it's like it's purely amusing, right? Like it's like watching reality TV or anything else. I don't necessarily root for anyone, but it's sure fun to like watch different people throw punches, and it doesn't even feel like they're being that choosy with their words anymore. It feels like it's just gone like, all right, we're just gonna we're gonna start saying things that are usually, I feel like, limited to Wendy's Twitter profile. But yeah, no, it's been fun to watch. I think it's always interesting, right? Like this. I think the other kind of undercurrent that I've been feeling recently is a lot of people are also like just asking the question, do some of these benchmarks matter as much, and things like that as well, which is another interesting point. Obviously, there's to some degree they do matter, but to some degree, I always like to bring up like, well, it's always going to depend also how many people you're going to have to pay to manage and use that product. So if one product can let you, reduce your team size by 1 or 2 people, I mean, a data engineer is easily 120 to 150K. So that's a lot of money saved as well. So it's always hard to say like what's better and what you're really going for, as well as then there are ways you could engineer your data differently to make it faster or cheaper or something, if that's also your goal. So a lot of different ways you can trade that off.
Yeah, I think what annoys me about benchmarks is companies who put out these benchmarks will treat them like they're the end all be all. Like, oh, clearly we're faster. X is faster than Y. It's like, all right, but how did you benchmark it? That's what I really want to know, because that's going to tell me when I should use your product. Like, if the thing you're really fast at, then maybe I should use your product for that. But it turns out that a lot of other things you might not be so good at, and that's usually how it goes. Like, which is why I wonder if there will be maybe database products that handle broader use cases in the future somehow that can be optimized in a whole bunch of different ways.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think the one thing that I did like from the whole benchmarking war, though, was the fact that people started removing the you cannot benchmark clauses from their user agreements. So I thought these are the dumbest things. What was it called? It was let me Google this real quick. It was benchmarking databases. Yeah, if anyone knows what it was called, the actual act or something like that, because it was really fascinating. So this happened. It was a result of something that happened back in the day with Oracle, I guess, as the legend has it, where they can't, maybe they didn't like the results of a benchmark, so they're just like, well, we just won't let you benchmark our stuff anymore. And this became like a pretty common clause in technology.
DeWitt clause. It's the DeWitt clause.
The DeWitt clause is right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, for the audience out there. But a bit of history on that. And so, for the longest time, was depending if the DeWitt clause was in a contract, you basically couldn't benchmark anything. Like there have been many databases that we wanted to benchmark, and because of the DeWitt clause, even if we did, we couldn't make these findings public. So it's kind of like, you would have the personal satisfaction of benchmarking, but it's like, Ben just dropped off.
Been bailed out. Okay.
Yeah, he's like, this is boring. He'll be back on hopefully. So, but no, I think it's an interesting one with the, I mean, just because in this day and age, what's the argument for not allowing benchmarking?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and again,
I know the argument for it, but tell me the sane argument for,
Well, I would hope that not only engineers, but technology leaders would be savvy enough to recognize that some of these benchmarks are selling you a bill of goods. In other words, they show you amazing performance on a very, very specific use case, and you really need to look at your use cases and what your future use cases are going to be to evaluate some of these things, right? Like, yeah, I can cite some notorious examples, but like, yeah, for example, you have an in-memory database, and your example is a very, very tiny data set that fits in memory. Like, yeah, you're going to crush it on those benchmarks, but what about when you have to spill the disk? What happens then? Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah, exactly. But I think the more benchmarking, the better. Frankly, I would almost like to boycott any company that has such a clause, except everyone used to have these in their user agreements, right? Like, they were just pervasive.
Yeah, exactly. But I would say, these days, it definitely benefits, products to have,
Yep.
A full transparency. And I think the ability for people to kick the tires on their own and publish its results. I mean, you should compete on the basis of your product quality, not on the basics of your opacity and obfuscation, right? I think those are pretty old school tactics that don't really lend themselves well to today's world. I mean, and as Scott correctly points out, everything demos well.
Yep.
So, you can get your benchmark data sets and try them out. But again, what really matters is, how does this work against my particular use case? Like, I don't, there's some standard data sets that come along with these databases. And, I think they're good for cross comparisons against that benchmark, but it's that, how I look at these things too. So,
yeah,
hopefully Ben shows back up. I don't know where he went.
Yeah.
But,
maybe his internet or something. I've certainly had that happen before. So
yeah. I know my internet's been kind of cutting out, or I don't know whose has been. It's kind of weird all day. So
yeah. But another thing I'd like to see from vendors is getting away from some of this cutthroat marketing culture and vendors claiming that they're good at everything. I want to hear you tell me what you are good at. To say, okay, these are things we do really, really well, and explain that to me and show the benchmarks that demonstrate those use cases. Because I think the reality is, full disclosure, we're Snowflake partners. We like their product. At the same time, I think there are some really awesome use cases for Databricks. It's not that I think that I'm not going to probably recommend Snowflake to every possible client, because I think there are some really great things about a data lake architecture too. And I would like to see both of these companies emphasize more, okay, this is what we do really well for you. This is where you might want to consider Snowflake, and this is where you might want to consider Databricks. And yes, there's this Venn diagram of use cases where they overlap quite a bit, and that's complicated. But I don't want to see BS benchmarks where they take some toy data set and they just show insane crushing performance. That really doesn't help me in evaluating their product, frankly.
Yeah, what was it? It was the common one that's used is it's a TCPH benchmark.
Yeah.
But anyway,
some of those I've looked at, and they were using a data set of a couple gigabytes, and I'm like, that doesn't really, this might be a standard benchmark. I don't see how it's relevant in 2021 or was.
Yeah, that would have been an interesting demo, in 2008 or something.
Yeah.
So
yeah, well, because one standard trick, to be quite frank, is you choose a data set that's small enough to fit into your SSD cache, and then you pre-warm your database. You run some queries that the data is all in your SSD cache, and then you can query it really fast. That's great. And that's someone's use case, right? There are use cases like this, but in terms of general purpose cloud data warehousing or data lake, that's not typically what we're doing. You might be querying, 10 terabytes or petabyte or something like this. So how does it do on that use case? I'm also interested in that question.
Yeah. Sorry, Ben's internet died. So he's trying to get back on and just chatting with him. Scott, what's up, Scott? I need to get Scott wants to join in. It'd be cool. It's a foreign marker. Don't count on it. So we got to get this guy back on the show. He's one of my favorites. Andreas, asked, are these benchmarks even useful? Very often you have to benchmark the use cases data either way.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Because we've seen so many, there's just so many nuances with people's data. Right. How many companies are running the TCPH data set in production? None, because that's a toy data set, right? So, it's just, I think, as everything goes, the mileage may vary. Same reason, if you test drive a car, how it performs on, say, a racetrack, or a small strip of road is not how it's going to perform in a snowstorm. And so I would say it just depends where you are. But that I think it also indicates too, you need to have some goals going into these evaluations. So I would have some very strict criteria, like I need this kind of performance on this type of a problem, for example, because this is what happens in my business. So,
and I find even like your standard bake-offs are very tricky, right? I mean, it's a really evaluating technology is a very, very tough problem. I feel like doing benchmarks is good, but there's probably also a significant social capital element where you want to talk to people who are really good at these technologies and can tell you, okay, these are some weaknesses we see with this tech. These are things that cost people a lot of money. This is what's going to take a lot of your team's time, but here's why this tech is awesome as well. Give me the good and the bad, and let's really sit down and compare and, just try to understand in detail how this might apply to my use case. And at some point, you're always sort of rolling the dice on these different technologies. Like you can't 100% evaluate something without actually adopting it in your organization. Unfortunately, it's just a reality.
And that's where the challenges start.
Exactly.
And this is exactly where, kind of what we were hitting on earlier. You introduce technology to a company, and I almost guarantee you it's gonna solve a problem for you. It probably won't address your larger issues, which is like trust around data, yada, yada, yada. So, whoa, Ben's back. Hi.
Hey. Yeah, sorry. Internet decided to be like, nope. Again, it's okay. I have a new Mac now that I'll eventually go unwrap. But
okay.
Hopefully, yeah. I don't know if anyone else experienced the like month-long wait for getting a new laptop, but it's
yes. Well, I'm going to order one probably sometime this year. I was not able to do it in 2021. It just wasn't happening. Like they didn't have the models I wanted.
I went to Best Buy, and like this is the first time I've been in a physical store in so long, and like pointing at laptops and like nope. I'm like, why do you exist? Why do you have these out here? Just take them away.
You can get them in 2023 if you order today.
I went to Costco. It was completely insane. It was a huge error, but hopefully I didn't get COVID. I was like double masked and everything.
Todd has a good point. We were talking about benchmarking, Ben. How many benchmarks deal with ROI at all? Great question.
I don't know. Again, I mostly know that core one that's referenced everywhere.
The TCPH one.
Yeah, I've never seen anything else. And again, I always see it as like performance, and then occasionally cost is referenced as well with it. Which cost could be kind of looked at as ROI, but again, it's like that's the ROI or the cost of the service, the solution, not of the people that have to manage it, or how usable it is. So,
ROI
which is also huge.
One too. Yeah.
Which one?
Oh, ROI is an interesting one too, because it's not just the amount of money you're going to invest. It's not really like the cost of managing this on my own, the cost I'm paying the vendor, et cetera. So I mean, those obviously go into ROI, but there's also the ROI on your opportunity cost, right? So if I'm going to adopt this tool, what did I just leave on the table for the next few years? Right. Especially if this tool is going to be insanely hard to get into, it's going to be really hard to get out of. So. What's that investment too, I think, is also often overlooked. We call it total opportunity cost of ownership. So it's not just the total cost of ownership, over the duration of how long you're maintaining this product and managing it, but also, especially with the proliferation of tools these days sort of gives you pause, right? Because it's like, what am I missing out on if I go with this?
Yeah. So. Yeah. I mean, I think that's like the hardest thing, and the thing that a lot of the people that I'm, consulting for, and I'm sure people you're consulting for like are always asking, because it's just like that's what they feel, right? Like they picked one tool 2 years ago, and then they realized there was this whole other handful, and it would have made it easier. And that's always like the hardest, I think, question to answer, because sometimes it's literally like the tool that could have made your whole life easier comes out 2 months later, or the feature for a specific tool comes out 2 months later, and you're like, oh man, well now this tool is great, right? But back 2 months ago it wasn't. So that's always hard to find a balance.
And that's why I think we try and steer people away from investing into extremely monolithic systems for exactly that reason, right? So given the pace of innovation and just new technologies coming out all the time, it's like I think you should definitely take a much more modular approach to the data technologies you choose to invest in. So by try a product out, use it, but be willing to ditch it if there's something it does provide a tangibly better ROI. So, but set yourself up so you can do that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to watch the evolution in the cloud space, because for a long time, the sales pitch on the cloud was you can just go in and turn on Redshift or BigQuery or Snowflake. But increasingly, we're seeing this enterprise sales model where it's like, oh, you need to sign a 3-year, multi-million-dollar contract with Snowflake to lock in. And then obviously you can't like flexibly move into new technology. You're going to be stuck with that tool for a while. You're not going to be backing out of a big contract like that. So.
Yeah, and I would say though, with a company like Snowflake, I would say it's a bit of a safer gamble, because at least they're going to be around versus Ben's awesome data observability tool from Denver that comes out and it's like got like 5 GitHub stars and and it signs you up on a 3-year commit or something. And you're like, you're crazy, but okay, let's do that. So I like to live dangerously. That would be kind of a interesting one. But we've seen stranger things happen, I suppose, right? So it's
it's going to be
commit contracts. We should just probably do a show on like how to negotiate a commit contract with your vendor. So exciting. Todd has a really good question. Todd always has good questions. We had lunch with him the other day, so we like him a lot. He's on our wavelength. So nice. He asked, how does one balance the shiny syndrome against the face of the fear of missing out in the landscape? What do you guys think?
I think it's always important to kind of like pick tried and true. Like if you have to, like if tried and true is over new, I think you brought up earlier, community is usually better. Better best practices, better tested best practices. Right. Like there's a lot of, I think this is especially true in like a lot of the new business or like best practices that are coming out, right? Like, oh, well, you can model your data this way, or treat your teams this way, which are like fundamentally going to change how almost your entire data organization runs. And it's like, yeah, but we haven't really tested this. We're just like, in theory, it sounds great, but I don't know. Sometimes it's just going to be easier until you see someone else do it well. I think it also depends on your company. Right? Like if your company only has 2 developers, you definitely probably want to do what's tried and true. If your company has the developers that it can spare, that you can be like, oh, hey, we got enough that we can try like a mini POC over here with this new idea, and then have these other guys, focus on the core concept and make sure that's still running. Then I think it works. But if you have a limited subset or a limited team, like building new things or trying out a totally new best practice, definitely has a lot of risks and maybe not a lot of reward on the other side. So
the other thing I would say is like it's helpful to have very concrete goals, and I feel like this is something that really went wrong in the Hadoop era, like peak Hadoop. Hadoop was actually not a bad tool; it could do a lot of awesome stuff, but in many cases, some developer would start hacking on it with like 3 old laptops or something. That's how their Hadoop cluster would start. And they'd be like, "This is awesome! Let's like spin it up." And pretty soon they had a big Hadoop team. And no one was clear on what they were trying to accomplish with this data or this cluster. And that's where you don't get ROIs if you don't actually even know what ROI is. Whereas if you can sit down and say, okay, why do we want to transition to a cloud data warehouse from what we have on-prem? And figure out some specific reasons. For example, do we think that auto-scaling is going to be a nice thing to have? Do we think burst capacity is going to be a nice thing to have? More flexibility with schemas and storage space and these kinds of things. If you can list out specific attributes that are actually going to be helpful for your data project in transitioning from what you currently have, then you're probably going to get a good value out of it. If it's just like, I have to jump into a cloud data warehouse because it's cool, then you probably shouldn't pull the trigger on that transition. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the thing is, there's going to be more FOMO, right? Because there's going to be more cool stuff coming along the way too. So, I mean, it's an exciting time to be in data. I also think it's one of the more mortifying times to be in data because it's there's so many options. So hopefully Ben's right and things consolidate sooner than later because it's just the curse of now you have, instead of like the restaurant analogy, like the In-N-Out burger menu, which is like literally a handful of things. Now you have the Cheesecake Factory menu, which is, a whole encyclopedia of, whatever you want. And so, I'm much more a fan of simplicity, but, I'm not here to argue about the funding landscape, which does drive a lot of this behavior as well. There's a lot of money to be made. And I think a lot of smart people chasing the money. So you're going to see just a lot of products coming out. That's how it is. And I think it's awesome in some ways because it does fuel innovation, right? So you're seeing, I would say, Scott Taylor will argue with me on this, and I tend to agree with him. I mean, I don't think there's necessarily new approaches; they're just being kind of readopted.
Yeah.
Right. So but what's happening though, I think what's new is that where I think a lot of these practices, data quality, observability, and stuff. I mean, these were mainly either for software engineering teams or for large enterprises. Things like data cataloging as well. Those were expensive back in the day. Now you can find any number of open source tools that will do a great job at these type of tasks. I think that's pretty cool actually. So, but Darren actually has a good point here. Oops, I can't seem to change anything. Oh, there we go. Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, StreamYard's a bit wonky today. He says, I think it all starts with a good reference architecture and capabilities based around a true data lake. So support the idea for not doing monolithic. So there's more support for that. And Todd, because it's cool, has been easy to spin for a lot of people for a long time. Duping the business on the promise of grandeur as well, more common than like that's marketing. So,
I mean, that's always gonna be the thing, right? Like that's always the joke, right? Like the salespeople promise things, and then the software or data teams have to deliver on something that they're like, I mean, it's possible if we had 10 times the budget and 10 times the people, but right, like it's. Marketing has to sell the dream, or sales teams have to sell that dream, and then sometimes it's doable, sometimes it's hard. I was so for a recent video, I was looking at this has less to do with data and more to do with like I guess like enterprise engineering, but it was talking about Hershey's chocolate factory, and then they tried to like implement or kind of reset up their whole computing architecture, like ERP, supply chain management system, and CRM in like 1996. And the people quoted them like this was like SAP times. Like I think they told them like, oh, this is going to take like 48 months, and then like Hershey's like, no, make it 30. So you can imagine like it just led to like a huge disaster and like nothing being set up correctly. So sometimes it's like selling the dream, sometimes it's like the business people want things that like are just unreasonable, right? Like maybe the tech people and the tools are like, no, it's probably not possible, but it's so many different angles that you can kind of ruin a project or make something unsuccessful like that. So it's very funny story. But
yeah. Actually, Scott says here, rhyme your way in and reason your way out. I like that. Totally going to steal that. Got a final question here from Alberto. What's up, Alberto? Happy New Year to you. What is the best way to show business or stakeholders the value added by data engineers' solutions, even if there's no ROI associated in the short term? Go for it.
Yeah, this is a really good question. I mean, first of all, what's the value of like analytics, right? Just high quality reporting, for example. I think in the past, IT has always been seen as a cost sink, even though IT and data engineering can be providing value just by providing visibility into what's going on with the company. The problem is that data engineering doesn't get to decide how the reporting actually gets used and whether it's used in a positive, productive way by the business. Another classic way in these days to show value is to come up with like some very specific, say, recommender product, and then show statistical differentiation of using that recommender and show that people buy more, for example, if you're an online retail. But yeah, when there's no near-term ROI, it's a very tricky problem if the ROI is more of a long-term commitment.
Yeah, it's kind of that like classic, like anything, most everything, right? Like it's like you look at basketball, you see someone like Michael Jordan, you're like, oh, I want to be him, right? Yeah. Like you see Facebook, you're like, we want to be them. And it's like, I think Ken G put out a great video recently about like why data engineering is becoming so popular now. It's because like all these companies saw Facebook, Google, and all these other big tech companies, and like, oh, we want to be them. We want to be doing data science. We want to be building all of that. But they didn't ask the question, like, well, was there anything else that they did before that, right? Like, did they build BigQuery? Did they build Redshift? Did they build Presto and all these other, solutions to manage all of that first? And the answer is, yeah, they did. They did a ton in terms of data infrastructure first, and then, we're able to kind of go and build on top of that. So I think, you kind of have to almost phrase it that way. It's the same in almost every field. Marketing's the same, like, right? Like everyone wants to already be the Conor McGregor or the Marvel Cinematic Universe level of interest interest, but that takes time. That takes years to build, and it takes planning. And so it's just one of those things where I think that's the best way to explain it. I think you also brought up a good way where you can maybe try to do some quick hits in terms of projects where it's like, okay, like just get enough data in to build some quick POC that maybe could return some quick value or show some theory of value. But long term, you're always going to have to kind of convince them. It's like, this is going to take time. Like it's not going to come around in 6 months. So
yeah, setting expectations is super key. So totally agree. Awesome. Looks like we're up on time actually. So it's been a fun chat. Ben, for people who want to learn more about you, how can they find out about you?
Yeah, I mean, if you're interested more in like data engineering, data infrastructure, kind of just career stuff, you can look at my YouTube channel, Seattle Data Guy, also on Medium, also just at the seattledatagaguy.com. But just look me up, and happy to try to answer as many questions as I can. I do my best, but sometimes I do miss out on comments, so I apologize.
Notice you're more active on Substack now. How's that going?
Oh, that's going great too. It's from a marketing standpoint, right? Like I have my YouTube. If YouTube does well, I generally have like a comment underneath that's like, hey, if you like this, sign up for my Substack. So that's been doing really well. Trying to grow everything in unison. Obviously, as someone who's been doing content marketing for a while, you realize emails are probably more effective, right? Medium, if anyone's ever written on Medium, you know how it feels like to have thousands of followers but get only 100 views on an article because Medium has decided that that's what's going to happen. So it's like, okay, fine. I'm not going to play that game too much longer then.
Interesting. That's awesome. Yeah, you've been killing it though. I'm super impressed and inspired definitely by your content. It's always great, and it's cool. Have to have it back soon. And yeah, for people who want to nerd out more on Ternary Data, we do YouTube as well. Ternary Data, we got a newsletter, kind of more exclusive content, not Substacks. We almost take the exact opposite approach of Seattle Data Guy, where it's like you don't get it unless you go to our newsletter, and it's not public. But we'll be doing some other stuff pretty soon. So thanks to the audience. Great questions today. Had a lot of fun chatting. So. Next week, we got Kevin Hu from Metaplane. He's going to be on talking about kind of all things observability, actually. So Kevin's a friend of ours. He's an awesome dude. So looking forward to our conversation. But in the meantime, hope you have a great week. A great way to kick off 2022, and we'll talk soon. So
all right.
See you guys. Bye.
See you guys.
Take care.